Hello everyone, my name is Edward Nkansa. Myself and Medred Darizuma are members of Group 3 and we are for Team Negative. And today the topic for the debate is, should the standard operating procedures for genetic analysis in laboratories across Africa be unified regional standard, or should each country establish its own based on national priorities? Genetic analysis is becoming an essential part of modern healthcare because it helps in accurate diagnosing, disease tracking, and the development of targeted treatment. Across the African region, there is a growth effort to strengthen laboratory systems and also expand genomic research. However, questions normally arises on whether should the SOPs for genetic analysis in laboratories across Africa be unified regional standard, or should each country establish its own based on national priorities. It is on this that this presentation supports the position that each country should establish its own SOPs based on its national priorities. Africa is a whole continent on its own and made up of different diverse realities. Different countries face different disease burdens, resource limitations, and healthcare priorities. Therefore, the key policy issue is not whether laboratories' standard operating procedures should be unified, but rather focus on how each country should be able to set their SOPs and how best it works for them. A policy that looks perfect on paper but fails in practice is not progress, but rather just theory. And Africa deserves solution that works in real life. And this will be our point that will support our argument. Firstly, context matters in everything, and from our initial studies, no two African countries operate under the same laboratory conditions. For example, some countries may have genomic sequencing facilities, while others are still building basic diagnostic capacity. Disease patterns also vary widely. What is a priority in one country may not even be relevant in another. If we force a single SOP policy across all these different countries, we risk creating guidelines that are either too advanced to implement or too basic to be useful. Tailored SOPs ensure that procedures are realistic, applicable, and actually improves outcome. Secondly, it leads to sovereignty and ownership. Another key issue is the importance of national sovereignty. Each country has the responsibility and the right to make decisions about its own healthcare systems. SOPs are not just technical documents or data. They reflect national priorities, ethical standards, and regulatory frameworks. Policymakers imposing a unified regional SOP could undermine this autonomy and reduce a country's ability to respond to its own unique challenges. When countries develop their own SOPs, they take ownership, and that leads to better commitment, enforcement, and accountability. And last but not the least, one of the importance of countries having their own SOPs as national priority is it helps in practical implementations. Policies in reality only matter if they can be implemented. One of the biggest challenges in African healthcare systems is not policy creation, but execution. A unified SOP may look good on paper, but in practice, it may require infrastructure, funding, expertise that many countries simply do not have. This creates a wide gap between policy and practice. Country-specific standard operating procedures, or on the other hand, are designed with available resources in mind, making them more feasible, sustainable, and effective in the long run. The team affirmative may argue that a unified SOP ensures harmonization, standardization, and quality across the continent. But from what we have analyzed so far, standardization does not have to mean uniformity. Africa can still have guiding frameworks or minimum standard without enforcing a rigid one-size-fits-all system. As a matter of fact, strict uniformity can actually slow progress because countries may struggle to comply with standards that don't match their realities. Flexibility, not rigidity, is what drives real improvement. And also, the team affirmative also made this assertion that regional SOPs allow adaptation. From our analysis, this sounds good in theory, but in practice, flexibility within a unified system is often limited. Once standard is set at the regional level, countries are still expected to align with it, even when it does not fully match their realities. And again, they also made mention that a standardization reduces cost. We found that this argument overlooks the initial cost of implementation, which can be very high for low-resource countries. Adopting a unified SOP may require new staff retraining, new equipment, infrastructure upgrades, and these are not always affordable. And last but not the least, they also said no loss of national control or sovereignty. In reality, adopting a unified SOP limits how much control countries have over their own systems. SOPs influence test priorities, resource allocation, regulatory decision, so they are not just guidelines, they directly shape national health systems. To conclude, our position is simple and grounded in reality. Africa's diversity is not a weakness, it is a defining strength, and any policy that ignores this diversity is bound to fall short. By allowing each country to develop its own SOPs, we respect national sovereignty, we address real, on-the-ground challenges, and most importantly, we create a system that actually works. Thank you.